Welcome back, everyone. Hope you managed to get away from the screen after that fantastic session from Tia Priest, working there in her relatively new role, grade 6 at the Department for International Development. We move now to the penultimate session, or indeed the final session before lunch, a break. Your reward at the end of this session will be a lunch break. Let me just remind you, on demand, under that button, on demand on Glisser, you have some treats for you there. Networking tips, some information about FDA, our partners for today's session. There's some videos as well. Do take a look at those over the lunch break. Not now, because Richard's going to share some valuable nuggets with us now, but afterwards, have a look at those during your lunch break, just to familiarize yourself with them. There'll be some further materials shared by way of on-demand content by Dods after the event, including stuff from this event. But for now, you can access information there on demand. Remember, please, that we've got some a hashtag for today that's beginning to trend. You can go in and share your message. It's hashtag BAMEIL. That's capital BAME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic, lowercase I, capital L, BAMEIL. And you can find the Dods team that have produced today in partnership with FDA. You can find them on Twitter at BAME_leadership, at BAME_leadership. So with about 55 minutes to share with us on what I think you'll agree are the mechanics of getting through that sift and delivering your best efforts at the interview. The mechanics of it, where it really matters, what really works and how it works. Preparing for your next role. Are you ready for promotion? You will be after listening to Richard Hillsdon. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Rob. You're a good warm-up man. I appreciate it no end. Okay. Where are we now? Got my slides here. Yep. Okay. We're live streaming soon. Yep. Okay. This morning, earlier on, what I did, for those of you who've stayed the course in the run-up to lunch, I was really setting the scene for the mindset that you might need to have in terms of being successful at promotion or selection generally. But then the other aspect of it, I think, was the context of success profiles and where we are on that, and the fact that the system is certainly preferred, but it's certainly, you know, we've got to learn to use it properly now, and you need to understand, if you're, you know, the rules of the game, if I can call it that, to be able to do it as it should be done. And that's what I'm really going to take you through now. What do the successful do, I suppose you could call it this. And I want to slant that to a BAME direction, because I think that's really important to think about how in this next era of diversity, with all the things that are happening at the moment, how's that going to sort of tip the balance? I'm going to share my slides, and I hope that you can see those. Getting through the sift and the interview. I want to make, first of all, a very big point about the fact that I've entitled this slide, Getting to the Party versus Getting the Job. Someone came up to me at Civil Service Live, and they used to have some sessions there where people could sit down with somebody who understood the system and talk about why they weren't getting promoted or whatever. And we had little 10-minute sessions, and this lady sat down next to me and she said, I got through the sift okay, but then I didn't get through the job. And I said, well, tell me the story. And she told me the story. And then the upshot of this was that she had regarded getting through the sift as the big hurdle. And I suspect that that's actually a pretty good perspective to have, because it is the big hurdle. It's the one which, if you ask civil servants what do they most worry about or get disgruntled about, it is the sift. No narrative feedback, a perception of variability in scoring and so on and so forth. And so it's not very surprising that when people do get through the sift, they think, well, I'm almost there. And in fact, I asked her what preparation she'd done for the interview. And she said, well, just to do more the same of what I did I'd written in written version for the sift. And therein lies the mistake. The deal when it comes to the sift is that you want them to think, well, we can't leave this person out for X, Y, and Z reasons in terms of the scoring. Getting to the party, as I call it. That's all it is. It's not about getting the job. You need to be at that interview. Getting the job, on the other hand, getting through the interview, the presentation, or whatever else other kind of hurdles they put in your path, that's different, because the people who've got to the interview or that assessment stage will all be able to do the job. That won't be the problem. And that's not the issue. The issue is, of those 4, 5, 6, however many people are going to be interviewed, who will do it best? Who's bringing something that others might not be able to? Who would do something a lot better? Who's actually going to bring us something that would surprise us because we haven't thought of it? It would be really important in delivering this job. And that's what it's, how are you going to be a compelling candidate? And it's realizing that those are two completely different challenges, and thinking your way through how you're going to be compelling is vital, because if not, what you'll get is the kind of feedback from the interview that you were as a good performance, but there was someone better than you. You were above the line, but you didn't quite meet the scores of other people. You'll come a worthy second or third, and that's not what you want to be. Hang on, I'm having a little problem with my slides at the moment. New share, okay. Oh, are we seeing them okay?
We still have the getting to the party slide, Richard.
I know, that's what I'm having a problem with.
Oh, here we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so you remember my Are You Ready quiz for those of you at the session this morning, and I dealt with this, CVs, personal statements to some degree, although I'm going to go back into that. But we've still got, how do you write a behaviour example? How do you know what your strengths are? And what will it take to get through that interview that I've just been talking about? First thing, some of you may have even seen me talk about this before. I do claim it as my own because a number of years ago, I felt that there was something missing in the star-based approach. And may I say, there's nothing wrong with the star-based approach. It will do equally well in this world of success profiles, provided you realize that, as I said earlier on this morning, that lots of situation, no too much situation, a task which isn't a challenge, action which is just a list of activities and not really much in the way of evidence for a result, isn't going to get you anywhere. The whole point of moving from competencies to behaviours, or at least not the entire point, but one of the main reasons was to focus on that action bit. What do you do characteristically? How do you behave that is successful? And that's what you've got to emphasize. And one way of thinking about this, mostly for the interview rather than for the written thing, is to add on 2 extra steps. It's what I call learned and transferability. Let me explain. The panel aren't very interested in what you did 18 months ago that was so successful, or rather they are interested in it, but only insofar as it tells them something about what you'll be bringing to their job that they like the look of. So therefore, playing it into their lap in terms of, so what did I learn from this experience, from that example? Believe me, panels are very, very susceptible to that kind of thing. They love it because it's telling them what, what kind of a person they would be buying, as it were. So what did I learn? And then transferability. And therefore, were you to select me for this job, I will be bringing with me X and Y, or I will be able to recognize that very situation that I described. Provided you picked an example which sits right on top of what they're after, the idea of starlet, as I call it, has been very helpful to lots of people. And lots of people come back to me and said how helpful it was in going that extra bit in the interview that makes them memorable at 4:45. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about was that. The next, question 3, is writing a behaviour example. This is not about regurgitating a competence thing as such, but by all means use the same examples. You've only got one career and one set of tasks and activities and successes to talk about, but you're going to have to think about it. Those behaviours, I've got a single narrative, rather short, that it hasn't got a list of effective and ineffective behaviours attached to it, so you can't just cut and paste it. That was the problem in the past, that people cut and paste them, so their answers were formulaic and really dull. This is a list, and I'm sorry for it. It's a long list, but you'll get it on the slides. It's really how my tests for a really good behaviour example. First of all, try and pick something that relates to the job you're being applied for. You can't always do that, but they've got to see the read across. Secondly, it needs to sit on top of the narrative of the behaviours framework. And if you don't believe me this, let me tell you this. Well, over my last couple of years of experience, I think making effective decisions has been the Achilles heel of so many people. I've come across, I don't know how many examples of making effective decision where the word decision isn't even in the answer. Unbelievable. Some people don't use it. Or rather, they describe a situation where a decision was taken, but it wasn't theirs. So you've got to stick to the core narrative. What does that behavior, what is it really all about? And the answer is in the narrative. Thirdly, if you can bring some evidence to bear, which is relevant to the grade level you're being applied for, I mean, it's fine to turn up and give a first-class star-based answer example that's showing you that you're a good EO when you are applying for an HO is all right, but it's not going to necessarily advance your cause. They are human, and therefore they are going to be persuaded by people who can nudge closest with what they talk about to the grade, because you are reducing their risk of appointing you. You want to pick a genuinely challenging situation. You remember the example I showed you on the screen earlier on this morning was of somebody who was just talking about activities, about how they did the job. What they want to see is how you deal with a situation that needs dealing with. So you've got to define it, not necessarily as a team problem, but one of yours. No matter how that's one of yours, no matter how much it involves the whole team, they're selecting you and not the team. So they want to see some I statements in there, and I know you know that anyway. Focus is on how it's handled and why it's successful, not just what you did. This is probably the most important one. Why did you choose the particular approach you did? And was it successful? By the way, your behaviour example doesn't have to be a stunning success. Very often, panels are very persuaded by people who produce examples which show how they recovered something of a success from what was really a very unfavourable situation. So that number 5 is very important. They want to sort of see inside your head as to how you thought about tackling this. Leads to a clear outcome. Doesn't always, of course, but if you can cite a clear outcome that is in the public domain and has got some evidence, then that's fine. And then 7, uses active and memorable verbs that draw the reader into it. So back to my grueling example of earlier, that I think if you have, if you're saying, I discuss this with someone, but instead you're saying, I actually had to work hard at finding the kind of thing that would influence them. That's a much better way of handling it. And then finally, demonstrating the relevance of your example at an organizational level. If you can somehow talk and relate what you've been describing as an example of making an effective decision or seeing the big picture, particularly the seeing the big picture, in the terms of what keeps directors and DGs awake at night, just goes down so well if you're going for promotion. I mean, I've gone through that in some detail because it's my experience that people write behaviour examples rather poorly. They wrote competency examples very poorly. And because it's about your behaviour, that's what you've got to focus in on, not all that background stuff. So I hope that's helpful. I put on the bottom here, I think of it as a work sampling test. Remember I mentioned work sampling before, the idea that so much better decisions are made about in selection terms if we actually see someone performing something which is close to what the job is. You can't do that with writing a behaviour example, but if your words paint a picture of what it was like to actually do that, then you're getting very close to what I mean by a work sample. It mustn't be vague, it mustn't be generalised, it mustn't be sweeping generalisations. It needs to be, they need to feel once they've read it, that's interesting, and they can get a real insight into what you were trying to do and why it was successful. Okay, strengths. Here is a quote from somebody who was on a success profile training course in the early days of 2018 when it first came out. Surely we want to encourage and celebrate different approaches to the same job. Well, of course, in the Cabinet Office's defence, I think strengths were so new to the civil service that it was understandable that civil servants needed to get their head round it, and the strengths dictionary, that 36 list of strengths, was a way of helping both selectors and applicants, play their way into this world of strengths. I think it's been quite criticised, and I think there's a sense in which when you sit down, as I do, and say to people with a job description in front of us, what behaviours would you pick? They don't have much difficulty picking the behaviours. They sometimes still pick the wrong ones, perhaps, but they don't have much difficulty. When it comes to strengths, you could pretty much perm 5 or 10 or any of those. You could make a case for it. And so therefore, strengths is a more difficult area for people. What you need to do is to be extremely clear what your own strengths are. So there is preparation, and to go through the list of essential criteria very carefully and say, where are strengths hinted at here? And you can also weave some of your strength statements, or if you like, into the way you answer behaviours. Try to avoid the whole question of saying, well, let's actually have the same strengths covering the same territory from 2 different angles. I've put on the screen right now, I'm sorry it's a screenshot, but if you look at the last page of the behaviours booklet in the success profile system, you'll come across, this is only part of it by the way, an interesting page where you see all the behaviours listed, and under each behaviour, the strengths that seem to go with them. Now, when the system first came out, I voiced quite strongly that I thought this was a really bad idea. Because it, for people who just had the familiar world of competencies ripped away from them as selectors, to actually have this nice shortcut where they can say, oh, right, well, seeing the big picture is about challenge, about mission, about strategic and visionary. Right, we'll use those ones. But all they're doing is rather reinforcing the behaviours end of things. So, and of course, it says at the top, but any strength can be assessed if suitable for the role. I won't name the department, but I was in a government department in which they said, oh, we're only allowed to use these strengths under these behaviours. And I said, that is not true. That is not the system. And in fact, I encourage vacancy holders in this world of pressure on us in terms of diversity, is what would be the kind of strengths that would take you out of the box of some of those things? What would be something you definitely don't have? Now, they look blankly quite often, because I think, as I think I say a bit later, selectors don't know how to surprise themselves, but you do. You are able, even if they have picked strengths that are sort of seem to be narrowly focused, in the way in which you write your behaviours answers, the way in which you have thought through your own strengths, you will find ways, and I know some people have managed to do this, of inserting a different perspective on things. But you're going to have to make sure that your narrative on this gets close to what they're after. You have to have done your research on the job. More of that in due course. I said a bit earlier that work strengths were going to be a new online test. This is a screenshot from the Cabinet Office's HR note to departments on casework skills, customer service skills, managing judgment test, and management and a work strength test. And you'll see the date is 8th of September on the work strength. So this psychometric version of strengths is out, and people are going to be invited to complete that online. And my understanding is it will be fed into sift decisions. So and if you go, your department may well they've got some examples of some of the questions, and they may have made those available to you. And it certainly would be worth your while going onto the government recruitment site and having a look to see as and when there'll be information about what kind of thing that work strength profiling has, what shape it's taken. I think it's a really good idea. There are lots and lots of strengths psychometric profiling instruments around. I think they've built this one up from the ground upwards, so it'll match the strengths dictionary quite well, I think. But the important bit is it will mean that the pattern of your strengths will go into the equation from the start, rather than have to pop up at the very last moment in the interview towards the end of the process. You might want to ask me some questions about that. Okay, let's assume you've got through the sift. Well done. You've got the scores, but it's no time to congratulate yourself, as I said, because you've got to the party, but can you get the job? And as I said, the other interviewees will probably all be able to do the job. So I had once, years ago, someone went for a finance job, quite a senior job. And he said to me, I can't understand why they didn't really ask me much about finance. They asked me for about 7 minutes about corporate governance. I think that was really unfair. But I said to him, wait a minute, you wouldn't have been at the interview if they didn't think you could do the job of finance. Why would they want to waste a lot of interviewing time on establishing your finance credentials when they'd already established that? What they wanted to know is whether you could do the other things in the job and whether you bring something else that's interesting. And that's what I mean. So thinking about what would make the difference, what would make you compelling, what would you bring to that interview that it would be hard for other applicants or candidates to replicate. That's quite a tough call to be able to think that through. But I would be willing to bet that there are dozens and dozens of people on this call who, in the interviews they've been in or will be in, could do that. So, question 5, success at interview, our last area. I'm going on time, okay. What I've put on the screen is the results of some research. I think it was done by Sussex University, and it's all about gender. And it's the fact of the way adverts use, recruitment adverts use words. I don't think it's going to challenge you much, to use one of those words, to decide which are the male words and which are the female words in that thing. In other words, which words tended to attract male applicants and which words tended to put off, therefore, not therefore, but did, female candidates, and vice versa. And you know something, words like determined, decisive, active, those are threaded through so many adverts. I mean, the civil service obviously has done a lot of work on gender equality, but we still find that kind of bias in the way in which the language is used. And it's very clear that words like empathic, considerate, and so on appear much less often. because we're always driving towards something that's got to be determinedly delivered and so on and so forth. So I show you that example because I thought you might have a go next. Poll number 4. I want you to, for those of you who've been in a selection or promotion interview as a candidate, and you felt that things have counted against you, if you felt that that was because of sources of bias of some sort, of course, quite unconscious bias, not the illegal kind, if you mean, but ones that imperceptibly were there and the panel wouldn't even perhaps have realized it. Could you find one word, or perhaps 2 at most, and we can create a kind of word cloud of these, of the words you think that capture what counted against you? I've also put at the bottom, it's a test of your verbal skill as to how to get that idea across in 2 words, but there you go. Do have a go at that.
Here we go. Wonderful. There are loads of...
Yeah, well, just give me a sample. Yeah, that's fine.
Experience, accent, and age are the biggest ones.
Yeah.
We also have smaller ones such as young, inexperienced, independent, class, hair, dress, unmacho, promotion, nervous, empathetic. But the main ones there being accent, age, and experience.
Okay, well, let's assume that you picked those things up. Your radar was good, and I don't doubt it. Experience, accent, and age, and in therein we've got some very substantial sources of potential bias that we will need to work on. And yet, when you talk to interviewers, they swear blind, of course, that they are fair and so on. And of course, we know that most of them are trying to be. But I'm thinking about things that go way beyond unconscious bias as defined in law. Just here is a recent quote from a senior member of the senior civil service that I'd like you to read. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of you out there that would agree with that, but you're wondering how and when and in what way is that actually going to happen. What that person was saying, who I know, saying that the trouble is that so many panel members perhaps unconsciously act and feel as though they are a kind of role model, or even if they don't feel it, the other panel members do. And that somehow or other we're trying to select someone like him or her with, the whole question of how they act, whether they cut it as the kind of model civil servant. He actually went on and talked about being white, male, Christian, and a whole lot of other things as well that will not be named, but somehow the package presents a kind of civil service model. And that's the thing that we now need to challenge. It was interesting amongst the questions that I saw in this morning's session when Paul was talking, were people talking about that there needs to be training for line managers, and I couldn't agree more. This is exactly what we need to do, is to be able to have some sessions which challenge these imperceptible, unconscious, role performances that play out the civil service as we've known it. Of course, what's also got to happen is that that job that was part and parcel of the success profile system, but which I think is being underdone very considerably at the moment, is to start with job analysis from first principles. What is this job? How would we like it done differently? Who could we have in here that would represent the kind of targeted change that we're interested in, that would know and understand that? We've got to ask ourselves uncomfortable questions like that. But in the meantime, the basics of getting through an interview won't change. And so whilst I wanted to get across that their side of the table has a lot to work to do, and I know that you'll be waiting for that to happen if it's not happening as quickly as it can, but you must play your part. So I'm going back onto the sort of conventional track, if you like, for the moment. And here's rather another one of my long lists, but it's really for reference for you afterwards. What are the basics of being interviewed effectively? I call yourself, you know, I'm not going to go through these exhaustively because we don't have time and I don't want to crowd the time for questions, but centering yourself beforehand, you know, I try to tell people, please don't take a day and a half or 2 days off from work to sort of rev yourself into a terrible nervous state before you go there. The best thing you can do for interviews, not for everyone, but for many people, is to have a really busy day and it's really crowded and you almost have to sprint into the interview at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because then you'll be yourself. And that's what we're after. Having your story ready. My test of whether you can do this is if the chair of the panel said, oh, we're not going to interview you for 45 minutes, you've got 3 minutes to set out why you'd be the best candidate. I reckon about 3/4 of the people that I work with in a coaching context would fail that, not because they haven't slaved over their CV and their application or the rest of it. They just haven't cranked the handle enough to think, packaged up in 3 minutes, what's my pitch for this job? Why am I it's the answer to that question, a compelling candidate? Getting off to a good start. That's uncomfortable to say, but umming and ahhing about something quite basic about why you're applying for the job is not helpful. You've got to pitch the thing at the right level. You can't be a grade 7 if you're an HE or SEO, perhaps, but you should be doing some grade 7 level talk. The more you can think like that, and I think that's, in a sense, more strategic, if you like, rather than looking downwards, looking upwards. Claiming personal achievements. Don't be afraid to say I. What above all that list is about is letting the evidence do the talking. You don't have to say, as somebody I saw in a CV wrote, I'm an acknowledged charismatic performer. Gosh. Takes a lot to say something like that. I'd like to see them in an interview. You don't have to do that. Just let your achievements demonstrate your charisma, if you like, from what they did and who they did it with. Modeling what they want. There's no escape from this. You know, there was a time in my career when you could sit in front of a panel and talk about good communication as a civil servant, but incoherently, and they wouldn't see there was a problem. All the rest, I think, are pretty useful here. I've talked about memorability. We know about body language. Don't be worried too much about twitching and fiddling. There's nothing rhythmic, I always say, is a problem. But eye contact is important. And I know there's a cultural issue here. It's not absolutely essential, but there needs to be some human contact along the way. And finally, the thing I wanted to say is the internal commentator. The idea that you can get to a point in doing this where you know your story and inside there's a sort of unheard voice saying, well done, Richard, you've got those 2-3 points across, but there's another couple you haven't got to yet. You've got to find a hook to talk about X or Y. It's that kind of space in your head to be able to do that. And people who are successful are good at that. Presentations are here probably to stay. And the only thing I want to say about presentations is you won't be able to use any slides, or you can use notes, but no slides, and you must stick to the time. Don't imagine that testing it out at your desk and you do it under 5 minutes will mean on the day. I did that with somebody not so long ago, and she did me a 5-minute presentation, which went on for 5:25. She said, that's fine, I'll cut that down. I said, no, I want to hear it. And she went through it, and it was 7 minutes and 10 seconds. Time seems to suddenly slip when you're actually doing it for live. Presentations are here to stay because it's about you communicating. It's not about the subject itself. It's about your candidacy and so on. Remember, do make sure that in your presentation you mention you in relation to the job. So you're saying something like, and I think this is a reason why I particularly applied for this job and why I think I'd be good at it. And you can link it. And so often people get lost in presentations talking about the subject of the presentation rather than about remembering why they're there. I'm almost finished. Only to just touch base on what the successful do that I haven't already said. Fearless learning from experience. Please, you must walk towards the trouble. The more constructive negative feedback you have in a way, the better you will learn from it. Don't think, well, I can't talk about staff management because I don't have many people to manage, so therefore I'll try and avoid it in the interview. No, it's better that you get to that subject first and say, well, I know that I haven't had a great deal of staff management experience, but, and then you think of what the compensator is. Evidence. Candidates are people who went out and bought themselves a new suit of clothes or a new outfit the previous day, and they're looking like they're at a wedding, rather than they're there as what I call an evidence-based influencer. The trick is to have convinced yourself that you are the right person for this job a week or two before the interview, and what you're doing is turning up and sharing the evidence for that with them. They want to see the real thing. And often they sense that's not what they've got. They've got a performance, somebody who's contrived, who, STAR is on the front burner, not on the back burner. They want someone who can tell the story about themselves because they were there, they experienced it, and you don't have to worry that it's not word perfect. They just have to know that you are the real deal. And that's why I put in here, above all, be authentic. Live your diversity, because they don't know what they don't know. You are going to have to bring the diversity to them, but it's up to you to make the connections with what matters to them. They may not buy something just for buying something different, but if you can link that to what they really care about in terms of the job, then that can make a real difference. Now, I've covered quite a bit of territory today, and I'm going to stop with this. The last poll is the last thing, and it's really how you now feel after I have doused you in reality. So where are you now as a BAME candidate after these sessions? More depressed? Got lots to do to sort yourself out, go and do your CV or whatever? Reassured that some of the things you've done are really right on the mark? Or are you thirsting to get into an interview tomorrow because you're right up there for it?
We've got 0% for more depressed, 47% saying got a lot of work to do, 47% saying reassured, and 7% saying give me an interview tomorrow.
Okay.
What was the number? Got a lot of work to do?
47. So we've 2 47s for reassured and got a lot of work to do. Then 7% for give me an interview tomorrow, and no one is more depressed.
Do you notice that I missed number 3 out? I mean, a lot of people are wondering what number 3 is. And do you know something? I'm wondering that too. I think I had a 3, but then I didn't want to put it in there in case it pulled everyone down. I can't remember what it was now. But I'm pleased to see that. But in a way, if we put in depressed in inverted commas, I'd like to have a bigger score there, because I want people to think, not depressed, but I want them to have the motivation that it's no good just sitting on the other end of an online thing like this and feel, yeah, I've got a lot of work to do. I want people to actually do it. The successful do it. They are not depressed, but they're motivated to change the odds in their favor. And I go back to what I started absolutely with the start of today. This is the BAME moment, I think. I think all things being considered, we are on the brink of this, provided you follow some of the things that I've talked about.
Let's
get make it very difficult.
Let's get into some of that with some questions, Richard. I think that's perfect. Okay. Here's a question that's got 6 thumbs up. My culture struggles with I statements. We are much more comfortable with we. You see, nothing we do is possible without family and friends.
I agree. And nothing wrong with that at all as such, because it's a human truth. But, you know, irrespective of culture, when we are actually at work, if we're in a team, we are bringing something to that team. That's why we're in that team, and we're adding to the general team effort. And it's the capacity not to ignore that, but to be able to describe it. It's not a boastful thing to do. It's not a look how great I am. It's explaining where your word mechanics, in the mechanics of delivering results, what was my part in that?
Sure. So turning up the attribution to what you've done. And I think there is still an onus on a panel to take that into account when listening to candidates, because some cultures, you know, are embraced more deeply with some people than others. And if it is, you know, you've been brought up on not accentuating or overemphasizing what I have done, and you speak from a we center, that can come across as less than. It's up to a panel to pull out what the individual did.
Yes, but I would like to just add, about 4 months ago, I did a video on the mental health aspects of the lockdown and so on. It was just a punt at what and I think we've learned a lot through this pandemic, amongst all the awful things, about well-being and we-ness and neighbourliness and so on. And I really hope that that's going to shift the meter a bit, that we becomes a more acceptable. We want to know what the we-ness is as well.
Yeah, I think.
How do you look after the well-being of your team? How do you take into account the well-being of your customers who don't really understand the policy? Yeah,
well, I think that's when I hear you talk about that, this is a moment and there is an opportunity for underrepresented groups, and we're here talking about Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff and colleagues today, about them, us stepping forward into that space. I do think that's part of what's happening.
We hope the dial will shift on that, is what I'm saying. But we'll
another
have to
question.
Wait and see.
Let's rattle through some, Richard. Success profiles are not used and understood consistently across the civil service. Do you have any advice on what can be done about this, please?
Well, I'm not sure what's in the questioner's mind there as what's not understood. I would actually agree with it. And I think some of the things that are not understood is what's the difference between a behaviour and a competence, and I tried to bring that out. What's the difference between behaviours and strengths, and in particular how crucial it is. One of the most important things is that we go back to basics in thinking about the work. We don't just accept a job description as, and we're not doing a lot of those things. And the answer to the question, Rupert McNeil, who's the Chief People Officer on the webinar, was saying we definitely need some more training. And my version of that will be, we don't need to explain success profiles so much now as how to use it.
Yeah.
And in fact, we are making some moves to bring that kind of training to bear.
Yeah. Okay. So we're on a journey there, folks. What about this one, Richard? I struggle to understand what a strength-based question is. Can you explain with a real-life example?
What a strength-based question is, well, I mean, one of the answers that you might get in terms of the success of the dictionary would be, we've got something like resilience, but we don't ask, are you a resilient person? Because that's not what it's about. It's about what it actually means. And so the question might well be, for example, are you someone who bounces back from setbacks, for example? And that would be a trigger for someone to talk about how they deal with adversity and so on. But it underscores, Rob, that of understanding what a strength is. A strength is not about, I went to a year and a half to learn how to do bookkeeping. That's a learned skill. Strengths is about things that you will remember about yourself, or people will remember about you from probably way back in when you were at primary school. You know, the fact that you're a very good team motivator and very empathic was probably the kind of thing you were doing in the playground. It's always been there. It might manifest itself in a different way. So we're talking about things not that people learn. The best example, I'm sorry, I have to use this one. My wife is a language teacher, but her strength is not being able to speak 4 languages. Her strength is the fact that she's brilliant at what I call small g grammar, because she's great at doing software and very good at building IKEA furniture, because she can follow structured rules really well. That's the strength.
Wow. Brilliant. Brilliant. I hope everyone caught that. Brilliant stuff, Richard. Richard, how do I talk I in the behavior working together? Now, I think you touched on some of this before, but it's got 3 thumbs, so I thought I'd ask it. How do you talk I in the behavior working together?
That's a very, very good question. I mean, when we talked about I'm not suggesting that we have to insert I everywhere is, but clearly working together is a collaboration, a human collaboration and an interaction. There are both sides. There are things that to do with of how we collaborate with people, what I bring to the party, what they bring to the party, and what's the common ground between us. So I think we can talk about we-ness very well in that kind of example, as long as I am prepared to say what I sometimes what I need from other people because of what I bring. And sometimes we can do that even in terms of strength. Sometimes I bring this, but I'm not so necessarily so strong at that. And I look to my team to be able to fill that gap for me, which they do.
Well, something you said earlier in the work, in the presentation, Richard, but I'm thinking about a time when I was leading a team that was responsible for all of the staff networks. And I introduced a regular, we called it a check-in, but I introduced a periodical meeting that happened once a fortnight that enabled them to work together. So I instigated a meeting that encouraged working together.
Perfect. That's exactly so. But it's still got, and that example is such a good one, Rob, because it's still got in it the ability to be able to say what the initiative was that I took. But we mustn't see this as you're only going into this to sort of beat your own chest because you're such a great person. That's not what this is about at all. What else have we got?
A final question, I think, looking at the clock. Let's try. Unbiased behaviors only work while sifting an application as identities are removed. However, this cannot be avoided during an actual interview. Shouldn't all interview panels be a mix of backgrounds, of race, religion, disability, gender, etc., to make the process more fair if the interview is the actual problem?
Well, 2 things to say there. I absolutely agree. We have got to increase the diversity of panels and so on, so they are as representative and as diverse as the people the pool from which they're selecting, and we've not achieved that at the moment. I mean, when we have, say, in Department of Work and Pensions 150 or 200 people applying, you've got to pull an awful lot of people together to do the interviews on 20, 30, 40 people. And so therefore it's quite difficult to have a sort of formulate, we must have one person who's from an ethnic background, you know, gender balance and so on. But we've got to have much more diversity there. But you remember I also talked about work sampling. I think that, you know, Rupert McNeil and I were talking about this, work sampling, the idea that we actually have what you might call neutral tests of people's ability to deliver things in their own way has to become part of the way we select, so that we're not looking across a table at someone and judging them for their face color or their accent or whatever. We're actually getting them to do something, and we're not interested. It's blind to that extent. It's not blind in the sense of a blind application that you come to a sift. But once someone delivers something and we see those scores without their names attached, then we've got indelible evidence that will hopefully swing the decision much more fairly.
Wow. Richard, it's been a joy. I've thoroughly enjoyed both sessions. I've made lots of notes that I've taken away with me. Who knows, for my next application, certainly for those that I coach and work with, I will be taking that with me into those conversations. It just remains for me to say thank you very much for being with us this morning and into the afternoon.
I enjoyed it.